She creates as she speaks. They create their world as they dance. They create their world as they dance. Their worlds they create as they dance. She creates her world as she weaves. She creates her world as she weaves. Her world she creates as she weaves. She creates her world as she paints. She creates her world as she paints. Her world she creates as she paints. They create their world as they sculpt. They create their world as they sculpt their world. They create as they sculpt. They create their world as they knit. They create their world as they knit. Oh, the knitters are smiling now. Their world they create as they knit. I know, there's always a bunch of crafters in this room. What's Mendel doing today? Crochet? They create their world as they crochet. They create their world as they crochet. Their world they create as they crochet. Create our world as we gather. We create our world as we gather. Our world we create as we gather. Hello, my friends. Welcome. Whether you are old or new to this space, whether you have been here every week in Yelala space or often in the company of our dear friend Rima, or whether this is the first time, please know you are equally welcome. And here is one of the blessings that we discovered about being in Zoom space, because I know there are lots of reasons that it doesn't always feel like the most connecting space, but we try our best to tear ourselves away from the idea of it being a business space or a focused meeting space, that we could use this technology for something else. And one of the most beautiful things we found about it is that for a moment or two, we can behold each other who have gathered here and wonder at the knowledge that we know very little about each other, except that we chose to be here learning together in this time this evening. And no one will feel uncomfortable. Whereas if we were sitting in a circle and we started gazing at each other's wonderful beauty, we would start feeling quite uncomfortable at someone looking at us across the circle. So I would like to invite you to take a moment to look at this group of people without which there wouldn't be a group of people gathering together, and give some appreciation. Internal appreciation is fine that you bothered to show up out of all the places you could have been this evening or today, this morning, wherever you are. And these people too, you have at least that in common. So I just give you a moment to behold. You could even wave. It's great when people wave because then you feel like you're being waved at. Who knows? And to those who are with us just off camera as well, know that we are really happy for your presence, that you showed up in this way that you're able. Mm. And let me introduce myself a little, and Yelala a little, and then I will introduce Rima, who's taking up the majority of this evening with her speech. And I know some of you are here with us for the whole Cottage in the Woods. And some of you are here for us just for this month learning about amulets. And some of you are just here this evening. And you are most welcome for whichever part you are here for. My name is Rachel. My ordination is Kohenet, which is something that even a lot of Jewish people wouldn't necessarily know. It's a fairly recent ordination that was created in North America by Tischler, who is works in ancestral healing and is also a musician. Previously was practicing as a tantrika, often with lots of embodied knowledge and wisdom. And Rabbi Jill Hammer, who is an amazing scholar and has a deep knowledge of the practices of Jewish women and femme folk. So the Kohenet Institute renewed and revived knowledge of ways in which Jewish women have been in spiritual leadership from antiquity to the present day. And as a small recap, because it is important that we understand the context of the group that we've decided to be in the midst of, it goes something like this. That whatever is the modern and current pain and trauma that is existing across the Middle East, long, long, long ago, in the ancient Judea and Israel, there were people who were there lived under a Roman regime. And those people who became Jewish people at a certain point were kicked out by the Roman Empire. And they had to work out how they could make a culture that had been land-based. All of our festivals come, just like a lot of European Christian festivals, they come from the cycle of the year, from the agricultural cycle. So all of those had come from, oh, it's this time of year, these fruits are growing, let's have a festival. Oh, it's this kind of year, it's the harvest, let's have a festival. So once they were no longer on that land and no longer farmers, they had to work out how they could have a cycle of the year if they didn't actually have land upon which they were living a cycle of the year. And that's how we get Jewish communities living all around the world, all over the place, with all different ways of being Jewish, because they are trying to continue asking themselves, how do we celebrate these festivals if we're no longer in that place? And they found all kinds of creative ways to do so. There was one problem, though, which was the majority of scholars who sat together making decisions and creating something that became called the Talmud around 500 to 700 CE. They were all men, and they weren't just any kind of men. They were also all men from a particular scholarly background. And so much as we find in other major world religions, the written code of what it is to be Jewish that is now received by a very literate leaning society became whatever the literary scholars, who happened also to be cis men, decided was the most important stuff. But whilst there were lots of people not in that room, that doesn't mean they weren't doing things. So just like we know of the hen wives in Christianity or the wise aunties in many Islamic countries around the world, so in Judaism too, in all of the communities, there were all kinds of people who were not the scholars, who were practicing aspects of their culture that all of the people in that culture thought were just as important as the written word. But now that our modern culture leans so deeply into wanting the written word, we sometimes, as modern people, do not look for the stories that are often the preserve of the outsiders, who often were, in those times, the ones that were women. So whatever gender you are now, we have a lot of knowledge that we can learn from those who were the women. And we will find that it is not only Rima, but many of her ancestresses, whether by blood or artistic inspiration as well, that were living as women in these times. What else to say before we hand over? So, Yelala, we just continue the work of our teachers of uplifting these stories of people who are not often seen. We also have been holding devotional spaces, and also in this time of great grief, our biggest work that specifically relates to Israel-Palestine has been around holding way of council-based sessions that encourages certain kinds of tender listening as the unfolding of suffering souls continues. That in a world full of shouting, there be spaces for people to learn how to listen to each other. And that's what we've been holding mostly in response to that. And this course, last year, we began, this was the first time we did the course last year. Rima and I began by looking at the ancient world first. So I was leading the first week. But then we got to the second week and exploring Rima's work, and lots of people came just to Rima's session because we opened it up like we have this evening. And then they said, oh, wait, I want to come to the rest of the course, but we'd already done half the course. So we thought it best to switch things around and begin. And as we go on over the weeks, those of you who are with us will start to stitch together and weave an understanding that those practices of the ancient world are really not that far away. And some of you might be here for esoterically and spiritually inclined, open to all beliefs and possibilities. You might just be fully on with amulets already, and some of you might be here because you are intellectually curious and you want to know about the history. Maybe you even feel a little bit cynical about amulets and what their power could be for a modern person now. But I hope that we will answer that as the weeks go on. For those of you who've come through Yelala and not through Rima, let me just introduce Rima as well. Rima Staines is an artist making painted talismanic doorways which open upon those old realms we half remember, traversing in childhood and in dreams. Her work is a kind of iconography of the otherworld, rooted in the black earth and green ink of story, and refracting a rusted amber light from a different and wholly other sun. And this evening, Rima is, in a moment, after I've introduced our tech priestess as well, is going to share stories about her journey into making amulets and her ongoing relationship with them. And is also going to show us around her artwork. And she asked me, oh, shall I do this? Should I make a PowerPoint? And I said, you know, it was such a pleasure last year. Rima just kind of wandered around from artwork to artwork, and we felt so at home with her. I said, that's much preferable. So I hope you enjoy visiting her too in her home. So lastly, let me just say something about being present here so that you feel totally welcome and comfortable. You can see there's someone listed as Tech Priestess Abby. We cannot fix all your tech problems, especially if it relates to your Wi-Fi at home. But if there's something you need to ask, also, if there's something unnerving that happens, it rarely happens in this space, but say another participant sends you a strange message, please do send a private message to Tech Priestess Abby, and she will be there to help you with such things as well. Also, Abby will be helping me towards the end because we will have a space for questions to Rima, of which I'm sure there will be many. Whilst Rima is speaking, if you want to use, some of you enjoy using the chat function, you're welcome to share reflections in the chat. Rima can't do the talk and also look at the chat all the time, but you might have reflections for each other, and some people enjoy that. There's no pressure. And then when it comes to the questions and answers, we will ask you to physically or digitally raise your hand. So if you struggle with finding the button for raising your hand, don't worry. You could also do something like this, and that's how we'll take questions. We're not taking questions as they go along because it could be that your question arises for you and then 5 minutes later, Rima answers it for you. So let's wait till the end for the space for questions. And lastly, to say something about your comfort here, because we just want to shake out of thinking of Zoom as a formal business space. So there's some people really fabulously demonstrating this, and I want you to feel comfortable too. I can see people eating and drinking. Please feel free to do so if you need. Please, if you need the toilet, no one's like checking if you're still here. Like, we love you. We want you to look after your body. If you need to stretch, some people are sitting, as you can see, in very half light and darkness. That's fine. I and Rima need to be visible, and Abby, but you could turn all your lights out and have a candle if you like. As you can see, we have several people who enjoy crafting while listening. So if you also are someone who needs to craft while listening, please, or fidget in some other way, please know you are totally welcome to do that. We want you to be in your best and most comfortable space. So I hope you all now feel fully welcomed. Most in particular, if you could find some way of, with your fingers, head, lips, eyebrows, some physical way of welcoming our dear and much loved guest, Rima Staines.
Hello, everyone. Hi. It's so lovely to see you all here and to scroll through all these faces. I'm wondering where everyone is joining us from. Um, I am sitting by my fireside in Devon, southwest of the UK. It's been pouring with rain all day here, and so it's been a very cozy indoors kind of day. My children are asleep in bed upstairs, and I hope that they stay there. um, And yeah, I'm really happy to be invited back to this space with Rachel. It was a really, really magical 4 weeks that we spent last winter, really delving into the magic of um, amulet making and from the perspective of Jewish history and anthropology, which was super inspiring and enjoyable for me, but also, from the perspective of an artist and really thinking together about what this magic of making can be. So tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about how amulets have crept into my work and what that has looked like. Now, I think some of you joining tonight might have come across my work before, but perhaps not everybody. So, just to very briefly introduce myself, I am an artist of, how old am I? 45. I've been an artist all my life. I'm a mother to two children. I grew up in London with artist parents and went to art school and studied book arts and crafts, and have been working ever since as predominantly a painter, but I've also used there's been many other strands to my artistic bow. I'm a musician, I play accordion, I write, I make puppets, I make animations, there's theatre work, there's all sorts of variations with my artistic work, but really at the crux of it all is a fascination with the imaginal realms and this way that it is possible with art to create worlds, and that really has been my fascination over the years. And I've realized as I've gone on that is what I'm really wanting to delve into. How can we create worlds, and how can we what's the difference between this world that we are in here and these other worlds that we feel when we are in our imagination or in our creative spaces and in our dreams. And my paintings, as Rachel touched on in her introduction there, are quite detailed. Often I paint with oils on wood, on pieces of old wood, and in watercolors as well. There's drawings, some printmaking, but they're quite detailed. They feel, I suppose, a little bit like so when people ask me to describe my artwork, it's not always very easy to do in words, in fact, but I say something usually like they feel a little bit like the illustration from a folk tale from Eastern Europe, maybe, that is 500-600 years old, so it's got that kind of feeling like it comes from a village, a folklore that's slightly away from here, and they are full of people. There's a melancholy feel to them, and there's I suppose a layer that is less easy to describe in words. And in fact, I have noticed over the years that the more people I meet, the more times that people encounter my work and I hear from them what they find and the feelings that are evoked for them in my work, I've learnt gradually what it is exactly that I'm doing with my work. And they uncannily, over and over again, in many different times and many different places, have said a similar thing. They often say something along the lines of, "Oh, it makes me feel like I can't really explain it. It's like something from my childhood, but not quite. Something that they can't quite find the words for it, but they're trying to describe something familiar, and yet strange. So something that leaves them feeling a little bit unnerved, but at the same time drawn towards it. And the more people that have said this similar kind of thing to me, the more I've had to take notice, and I've thought to myself, wow, that there's something in here. I must be unknowingly tapping into this part of people that is, it's waking up something in people that's not sort of right at the front. It's kind of tucked away somewhere in their psyches or in their subconscious. It's hard to say exactly where it is, but that has fascinated me, and it's really part of the sort of slow realization that as an artist, I've learned what it is I do. So you start off being an artist, and you make work that comes out of you, that you're inspired to make, but you don't necessarily know straight away the nature of the thing that you do. And it's through the communications with people who see it, who appreciate it, who for whom it is moving, that I've come to sort of understand slowly, really, that the thing that I do isn't just, I'm definitely not just making pretty things to hang on the wall. I'm doing something else with sort of many layers below that, and that's where I've started to think about this, the nature of magic making, and what art is, and how it's related to magic, and what indeed that even means. I am particularly interested in this, in the in-between spaces, as I guess quite a few of you will, who know my work, will have seen. And these in-between spaces, these liminal realms, the places that are not quite one place or another, are for me the potent places. And in folklore all over the world, we hear stories about uncanny things that take place on the edges, whether that is an edge place in time, whether it's a particular time in the year, whether it's a birth or a death, whether it's the dawn or the dusk hours, when it's not day or not night, when it's not summer and not winter. Those edge places are the ones where something uncanny is definitely going to happen. It might be a borderland, a literal borderland around a country, or around, the place between the land and the sea. Often is a liminal space where uncanny happenings take place, and those are the places where the moments where the protagonist might meet somebody from the other world. It might be a mythical being of some kind, of somebody from the fairy folk, and so humans have known for a very long time that this in-between space is a really, really potent place. When I was writing my dissertation at the end of art school, the title for my dissertation was Misrule, Mockery and Monstrosity in Marginal Medieval Art. All the M's. And it was really a study of the beautiful medieval manuscripts, the illuminated manuscripts, and the art in the churches in the Middle Ages. But specifically, I was interested in the margins. So for some reason, I don't really know where this began for me, but the edge places have been the most interesting places for me. I think because that's where all the interesting folk get pushed to, and that applies in a culture as well. So in a culture, you will find the marginal folk at the edges, whether that's a literal edge, whether that's at the edge of the woods or in the margins of a city. There are edges on all the different realms. But in this dissertation, I was looking at how could it be that in a society that was so staunchly religious, when you have the Bible, this holy book, and the holy place, the church, how could you have something that was so upheld and that had so much beautiful artistic input? Around the edges, you would see these fantastical and really irreligious, profane imagery. How could that be? How could you see images of nuns making love, or monsters swallowing the shit of other monsters, and all sorts of topsy-turvy and upside down scenarios? Sometimes they were quite mundane, sometimes they might be little vignettes of daily life. They might be illustrations of proverbs. Often you would see the topsy-turvy, the upside down world, things being turned on their head. So the cart before the horse, and these kind of proverbial back to front things. So there was really a play on how far could they take it, when in the middle you've got the holy book, and on the edges you've got all of this naughtiness. And the same applied in the churches as well, underneath the monks' seats, and right up in the corners, the gargoyles and the fantastical imagery there. It fascinated me. How could it be that you could have this? How was it allowed, in fact? And so that study sort of took me on through this understanding of what the edge place was and is, and why we need it, and why we need how it sort of juxtaposes against the center. And you can't really have one without the other, I don't think. But the edge place for me, as well as being this sort of melting pot of the fantastic and the different, the odd, those are the characters that end up in my paintings. Those are the characters that I find most beautiful, in fact. And they are the ones that end up on the edge. And also, those are the characters, and those are the places that have the power. That's where the alchemy takes place, because of the in-betweenness of things, because it's on the edge. There's this potency, and for me, that's also the place where the art that has power comes from, or should come from. And the practice of being an artist, for me, has meant learning to traverse that in-between place, that hedge between the worlds, as I've described it. And sometimes that is easy, and sometimes it's difficult. We all have a different relationship with that other place that we go to find the inspiration, to find the imagery that we bring back into this world. But the practice has been something of learning how to get there and how to get back easily, and for it to become a kind of familiar journey. Now, I think that this place, the in-between place for me, there are many layers to why it's sort of becoming more and more important in my thinking. But I think as an artist, um, if you are really delving into the realms of the imagination and really finding that kind of the moment of letting go of this, of what's in the center, and crossing over into that place of the imagination, that's it is a kind of magical act. And if you read all the folk tales, you know that as I mentioned before, that place is not necessarily very safe. The crossing places are the places where, because the veils are thinner, you are more likely to be a victim of some kind of spirit or some kind of evil eye or some kind of, depending on what culture you're in. That's the time, because you're in the in-between place, because the veils are thinner. Those are the places that are more subject to attack, perhaps. Those are the times and places where somebody might get taken away by the Queen of the Fairies, in fact. And so those moments, really, they've always fascinated me in the folk tales. But if I think about it in terms of the practice of an artist, and why the potency, how this kind of danger and the potency marry together, it really brings us around to the subject of our course here, because the amuletic practice of making objects to protect us is primarily because of those edge places, the dangerous places. An amulet, as we will discover a lot more about down the way, over the next 4 weeks, is an object of power. It's an object that somebody might wear on them, or make for themselves, or for another person, or for their house. It's an object that will protect, that it will do something. It's an object that has an action. And an amulet, traditionally, you will see, I mean, I'm sure that all of you can think about moments where you've used objects or jewelry or made marks that you want to do something. You want to keep something safe, to put a locket of hair on you that is precious to you. You might even just touch wood to keep yourself from some kind of bad luck. So we still have this kind of currency of understanding this edge magic. And so many amulets in so many cultures have been have this relationship, for me, which I find fascinating, with the edge place. And that edge place might actually be it might be the boundary of your house. It might be the boundary of your body. It might be the edges of your clothes. It might be the places that might be vulnerable to attack. So, for example, in this country, for many centuries, there was a practice of burying something called a witch bottle under your hearthstone or under your door sill, to protect from the spirit of a witch which might be after you. And that involved getting a bottle, and inside you would put, if you believed that you yourself were that a witch had her eye on you. I'm not going to go into the arguments about whether a witch is bad or good here, because obviously that's a much larger conversation. But we're talking about people's idea of a bad spirit, really, that might be after you. So if you believed that this witch had her eye on you, you would make a bottle and put into that bottle something of yourself. So that might be your hair, or it might be some urine, or it might be nail clippings, that kind of thing. And then you would also in there put some bent iron nails, perhaps some thorns, and then you would stopper up the bottle and bury it under the door sill or the hearthstone. So significantly, it's a place that is that where some spirit could get in, so she might be able to come down the chimney. But the first thing that she would find if you'd buried this witch bottle there would be something that seemed like you, and so she would go inside the bottle, and then she would get caught on those bent iron nails and never get out again. And in fact, I did a painting of a witch bottle some years ago, which depicted the witch herself trapped inside the bottle, because I kind of imagined, what would it be like if you were the witch stuck inside that bottle? But these bottles have been found in many house renovations around the country. They find witch bottles with remnants of human urine or hair and nails inside them. And there are all sorts of other devices, all sorts of markings on houses and objects that get hidden in different places on the boundaries of dwellings. But if you think about traditional clothing from all sorts of different places in the world, the markings and the embroideries on the edges, around the neck, around the sleeves, around the bottom hem of an item of clothing, particularly for vulnerable people like babies, so that the ones who had just arrived from the other world, there are all sorts of extra special amuletic devices that needed adding. And really the amulet is an object of power that is made by a person. So it has this power. It could be anything, it could be a beautiful item of jewelry, but it could just be a stone. It could be a little piece of cloth that you wrapped up in a bundle and put some words in it. Often they would be little spells or prayers written on a piece of paper and encased somehow and then worn or put somewhere. The reason that these things work, I think, is because a person has put their intention in the making of them. And for me, that's so intrinsic to the artist's practice as well, that really it's become more and more fascinating to me because of this entwining of the what it is to be an artist, what you're actually doing when you're making things. I'm not just making a sort of vacant objects. I'm making something that is meant to do something. It has an action in the world, and the doing of it, the creating of it, makes it potent for another person. And so it means that when I'm creating that piece of work, when I'm doing the painting, I need to be putting that intention inside it. So I need to be in the right kind of headspace, the right kind of halfway between this world and that world state, I suppose. And that all of the intention and all of the wishes and the stories that I want to put into that work go in as I'm creating it. And that sounds easier to do than it actually is, because sometimes you create work that is, nice, but doesn't have that juju. And sometimes you create a piece of work and it really has the juju, and it gets confirmed because people have response to it that confirms to me that that one really worked. And then other ones, they're nice, they're okay, but they're not fizzing in that way. And so this practice of art making really has meant that I've delved deeper and deeper into the study of what this magic making is, and specifically in an amuletic way, in this the idea that we as humans have the capacity and the power to take some materials and put them together and make them do something even if that's just image making. So it might just be mark making, but the act of making marks, the act of making a beautiful thing, putting some things together with intention, has power in it. And that leads me on to all sorts of other layers of wonderings about the psyche and about how we address different struggles in our lives. But that leads me on to tell you about the amulet making project that I have been working on. Now, I've spoken a lot over the years about my belief that art, the art making is alchemy, in fact, that we have this power as artists to create change, so that we can, with our work, turn one thing into another. And I don't mean that in some sort of flaky esoteric way, although I don't mean just literally either. I mean that art, in just the way I was describing when I was talking about amulets just then, art can change things, and it changes us inside. It changes things out there. And especially if we imbue it with this really potent intention, it does it all the more so. And I've believed this for a long time, and I've spoken about it, about how art has this alchemical quality to it, or at least it should do if it's done well. But more recently, I have been made to consider this in a much more sort of close way, because I've begun this project that really was a practice of challenging myself in this belief, in this thing that I've spoken about so much. I, in the face of the last few years of my life being really, really quite hard, I've had some super challenging stuff happen in my life, and I thought to myself, what would happen if I turned this on myself? What if I took this idea that I have been speaking about? What if I took this idea of the fact that art can change things, that art can have this kind of magical property to it? What if I kind of put my money where my mouth is, and make amulets for myself? What if I use my art as a kind of medicine for myself? Because it kind of challenges me to. It means that I kind of can't escape, if you see what I mean. It can't just remain a theory. It can't just remain something that I write about in an artist statement. If I'm making it for myself, if I'm making it for something that I really, really needed, that it becomes a super vulnerable practice. And I can't sort of, get round it, if you see what I mean. It kind of shines the light on my own struggle in such a deep and potent way that it forces me to make work that, or at least to try to make work that does what it says on the tin, if you see what I mean. So I began this project of making amulets, which has been a very sort of self-led in the way that there isn't really a path ahead. I don't know how long it's going to take. It's an ongoing project, and it's sort of leading the way. I'm not really, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. It's really been quite fascinating. Now, as much as I have the fascination with that, ancient jewelry from all over the world. The amulets that I've made are not small items that you might wear around your neck. They're paintings, they're oil paintings on pieces of wood, but they're not just paintings on wood. They've also got other materials in them. They've got metal, they've got thorns, they've got pieces of thread, they've got definitely a lot of spells. They've got pieces of lace and bells and gold leaf and wire and all sorts of things. And we will see as we go along what more might appear in the next ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one by one and talk about each piece, where it came from, why I created it, and I'm going to hold them. Hopefully this is going to work. I'm going to hold them up to the camera so that you can see in well enough light and detail. So I'm going to begin with this one. So here we have, just going to let you have a look. This is a really heavy piece of burr wood that grows on the side of the tree. I'm actually not sure what kind of wood it is, this one. But it's a chunky one. This piece is called Amulet to Protect Against Lightning Storms in the Brain. And it was created as an amulet for my epilepsy, which arrived in my life just after my youngest child was born. He's just turned 6, and he was a tiny baby when I began having severe seizures in the night. And there followed a really hellish time of trauma and difficulty, and then a journey with epilepsy and figuring out what it was and what that meant to me and so on. And I'm still living with it now. But this piece really is, I kind of wanted to create a blessing for my brain, some kind of protective spell. I picked the piece of wood, as you can see, because it kind of looks a bit like a brain. But when the interesting thing was, now I mentioned earlier that the process is dictating the direction I take. So I'm really just feel like I'm being led along as I make these amulets. This one, as I began to prepare the surface to paint on it, because normally when I paint on wood, I make sure the surface is quite smooth, and in some cases I put a white ground of paint underneath before I begin painting. But in this case, I found that as I did that, the center of the wood I noticed was completely rotten. And so I had to dig out the hole. I had to dig out the rotten part of the wood, and I dug and I dug and I dug. And when all the rot was taken away, there was a great big hole in the middle of the wood, which was no good to paint on. So then I thought, well, what am I going to do with that? And I decided that I wanted to fill it with metal, because I liked, which was a bit of an experiment. I hadn't done that before, but I liked the juxtaposition of materials like that. So this is a very low melting point metal that I cooked up on a little gas stove in my studio and made into molten metal, which I poured into the hole. This piece here is also metal. It's cold to the touch, and it goes quite deep into the wood. And it made this kind of almost like the mending of a scar, and it's kind of beautiful. You can see maybe a little bit on the top how deep it goes in. And then I painted the head around it, and there are angels inside the brain. and across her brow are old coins, a little bit like a kind of bridal headdress. So it's a prayer, it's a blessing, it's a hope. It doesn't make sense literally, but this is the thing that I made for my own struggle. And the interesting thing is when I show people, even if sometimes even before I've explained where it came from, they burst into tears. And for some people where they've shared the experience of epilepsy, it's really spoken to them in a deep, deep way. And this is the part of the process that I wasn't really expecting, because, as I said, I kind of was making them for myself. So I'm sort of learning also what it's for as I go along. So this was the first, and then came this one, which is called Amulet to Make Pain Bear Fruit. And it's also painted on a piece of wood. If you can see along the top, there are thorns. Those are rose and bramble thorns stuck all the way along the top. The wood is so thick. It's a piece of oak, this. And the young woman in the painting is bound all around with bramble thorns which are piercing her flesh. In the center, you can see this. Here is a small piece of red thread over her heart with a little copper wire in it. The bramble thorns are piercing her flesh. And then she is crowned with a halo of fruiting blackberries. So perhaps you can see in her face the pain. This, in part, was in a way, the pain, it speaks to us all, and we all, there's not a human being alive who doesn't experience pain of some sort. So it's a universal story, really, but it came out of the pain that I was in after the time that I've just talked about, with the epilepsy arriving in my life. A couple of years after that arrived, the father of my children left. And so I have been on a really hard journey of single motherhood, and the pain and the grief, and then the figuring out of the trauma that epilepsy has brought, which altogether has been really, really hard. So the painting for me has been a kind of consistent thread throughout for me, and this one really, as I have said in the title, it's an amulet to make pain bear fruit, and that was my prayer at the time. I guess still is. It's a hope that pain doesn't completely finish you off, and in fact, you can be transmuted by it, in it, through it, and that some fruit comes of it that maybe perhaps at the beginning you don't know what that might be. So this is the second one. And the third one, I'm getting just glimpses of things that people are saying on the screen, and then they disappear again. Thank you for your kind words, everyone. The next one, I'm going to have to move the camera, so hold your horses. I hope you won't be dizzy. This is a rather large amulet, which actually It began some years before the project began. It's just to my right here. Now it's very long. It's a house spirit. It begins up here. Here he is. Oh, sorry. This is very lo-fi, this. Here he is, and his feet go all the way down to the ground here. And I made him originally, you can see his body is full of objects that have to do with the home and the hearth, bread and the animals and the fireplace. And he is painted on a big, heavy piece of wood. I say he, but I'm not really sure whether he's a he or a she or a they or a somebody else. And up here there are a couple of mythological creatures. I painted him as a house spirit, and he stood beside my door for a long time, but beside the front door, protecting the home. And then a little while after I moved into this house that I'm in now, he got knocked down the stairs, and the top part snapped off. And he kind of stayed in the corner as one of those jobs to do that I thought, oh, I'll fix it at some point. And then it struck me when I began this amulet making project that actually, the mending of this amulet, of this house spirit, might be part of the project. And so I realized that mending the spirit of the home, which in some, in just some descriptions, when a couple separates, it's described as a broken home that the children are being raised in, which I don't like. But that kind of that attitude, the cultural attitude, is obviously inside me as well. So I wanted to kind of somehow fix that, and so I thought, well, if I mend the house spirit, perhaps that's a home mending that is needed. And so I mended this visibly with metal again. So there's molten metal in the crack, and then I've kind of sewn it with red cloth and brass wire. And then when I actually shared this online and talked about the process, somebody commented, "Oh, isn't it interesting that the spirit that was broken off was the male spirit?" And I hadn't even noticed that myself. I hadn't noticed it at all, and it took somebody else to comment. So there it is. It's back beside my door. Not right now, but I've brought him into the living room so that I can show you. With the hearth in his belly. And then the last one, which has been made this year, so I didn't show at last year's Cottage in the Woods, is that one, by the way, I've now called House Spirit Broken and Mended. Okay, so the next one is quite hard to show because it's an odd creature. This one is a kind of love amulet, but not quite. It's painted on a piece of root wood. I think it's ivy, but I'm not sure, which I had kicking around my studio for a long time. And it looked exactly like a heart. So this is like a human heart. This is the shape that it was in when I found it. So that with the root, even, I don't know whether you can see, but even inside here, let me hold the light up perhaps. There are arteries. I mean, it's crazy. You can see this on my website if it's not clear enough here. There are little, I guess, little dried out stems that are on the inside that look like the arteries, but the shape of it was just uncanny to me. So I thought, well, this has to be this I have to make this into a heart. Um, and it actually took me quite a long time to finish it. Um, it's called Amulet to Find the Singer of My Heart Song. So it's a it's a it's a longing and it's a hope for love, but it's not just that. It's something about there's something in there about music as well for me. Um, and all over this amulet are paintings of musicians playing instruments, singing. The gold that you can see reflecting in the light is gold leaf, and that's the song, the music coming out of their instruments. Um, it's possibly the most difficult thing to show and display in any form. Photographs of it don't come out very clearly. Even displaying it is difficult because there are images all over it. Um, and it does kind of remind me of the sort of amuletic um, folk magic devices that you see in the Witchcraft Museum, for example, in Cornwall. Um, and then there's a little pouch of magical things attached here and all sewn up together and a cord. So I can actually wear this one around my neck, although it's enormous. And the reason that the musicians are there is something to do with this long love that I've had for particularly the music of Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Um, that's the music that I play and sing and feel unbelievably deeply moved by and can't really explain why. I have this relationship with the music, not just the music, but the folklore and the traditions of that part of East and Southeast Europe. And a Jewish tradition as well. I don't know why it's so deeply beloved for me, but it has been a long, long time, many years, and that's the music I love to play. And I know that the music for me does something really profound that relates to my heart and it relates to my art making as well. In fact, the painting that's above me, behind me, is a painting called The Alchemist, which some of you might know. And that also is about the relationship between music and art making and my heart, and the heart as a kind of um, alembic for the place where the magic emerges from. But for me, very much every time I create, I have music. I listen to music as a kind of, I call it my drug of choice. You know, the music for me is the world. It opens the worlds for me. It opens the doors to the world. The doors on the edges of the world open more easily when when I listen to this kind of music. And so it's deeply entwined with my own sense of longing and my kind of and love, really, in a fundamental way. So I can't fully explain this one, but it's something about the it's a longing for love for sure, but it's somehow entwined with music and how that um, the relationship with um, this old tradition and place wakes something up in me that feels like it's familiar or either I remember it somehow. It's extremely hard to put into words. Um, so there we go. I would love to know how I'm doing for time, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you feel open to questions.
Yes.
Uh, Thank you so much for all sharing. I'll reflect a little bit and give people time to think of questions, and I can see people's hands are up. So Abby is gonna take a note of the hand she can see, and they'll come to the people as many as possible. and we'll have some other spaces in the course to ask questions. And if there's something simply burning, I'm sure if you email it to me later, me or Rima can answer. But I just wanted to briefly reflect and remind us of the joy of learning together in this communal space, the thing that was starting to come up that makes learning together so juicy. And you should understand as a way of learning together that has been a folk way of learning is the stories that start getting shared in the chat. And I know not everyone can look at the writings and listen to Rima at the same time. But for example, Rima, as you were sharing about your amulet that responded to your epilepsy, then Mindel was talking about a particular kind of Yiddish divination, which her own grandmother practiced, which is called Blagissen, in which a medicine woman recites a psalm or incantation and then throws molten lead into a vessel full of water for removal of the evil eye.
Molybdenum.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes, I've heard.
exactly. And so, and it's also,
Okay.
neighboring cultures, but it's as
Yeah.
people start, this is our reason why we are pulling together always the ancient world and medieval world and modern practitioners in the things that we study, because it's so easy either to look at the ancient world and be very romantic about it and think, oh, and everyone was sort of so powerful, and it was also potent, and it doesn't happen now, or I could never do that. And here we can contradict ourselves and see, oh, in these incredibly crafted, well-worn skills that Rima has, or even in tiny things that each of us do, there is a hint of this practice still alive. And for the other side of our cultures that may be cynical about it, as we listen to someone who practices in modern time, we cannot be so quick to dismiss what seem as simply esoteric practices of the past. For as these women of the past sat melting their metal and turning it into new shapes, so some of what we're hearing from Rima was clearly in their mind and their understanding of what they were doing as well. So we can't keep all of these practices apart, and hopefully we can find a way to understand that these things are still fully alive and respectable and deserving of honor today. With that, I wish to hand to Abby, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, naming people. Abby, would you be happy to do so? Um, and we just ask you, being aware that there are other people who might be waiting to ask a question, so do try to be concise in your questioning. Thank you.
I know Valerie had a question. If anyone else have questions, please make sure to raise your hand for a minute or two so I can write it down. I'm going to unmute Valerie now, and Elizabeth, I see you as well.
Hello, and thank you so much, Kohenet, Rachel, for holding this space, and Rima, your art is astonishing and extraordinary, and I'm just really feeling so much privilege to have a personal, hand-delivered explanation of those four extraordinary pieces. So I just start with that, but keeping it brief, I wanted to ask you about the house spirit, or the spirit of the house, because I noticed around, as you panned up and down, a series of animals. And my question has to do with whether these animals are, because some look like domestic. I mean, I saw them quite briefly, and some look more like wild, like a lion or something. And I thought, what are these animals? Are they protecting the house? Are they welcome? Are they not welcome? Maybe you could say something about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your kind words. Yes, a mixture really, and the thing is, a lot of my work, it's often it's not a sort of literal X equals Y thing that happens, and I work in a very intuitive way. So I it's a sort of growing practice over the years to just let what comes through come through. A lot of the imagery in this one was inspired by the kind of folk objects from Russia, and it's a beautiful you know, spindles and all sorts of the kind of backs of spinning wheel chairs, incredible house decorations, really really beautiful. So you would see lots of these motifs in sort of Russian folk art, which I was very inspired by. But as to choosing things specifically to it depends. You would think with an amuletic making that you would say, oh, I need this here to do this, and I need this to do this, as if you're kind of mixing a spell, and these are all the ingredients, and you need to add this thing in order to do that, which, you totally could do. But my practice seems to be sort of the opposite of that. It seems to be very intuitive, and I sort of make it up as I go along, and I don't have a literal kind of explanation for everything, except perhaps you might say that it must be beautiful, and that's really important. And so I'm trying to make it beautiful, and if it pleases the eye, then I think that's really it's a really vital ingredient, actually. And actually that's corroborated in lots of other sort of folk practices and traditions, that you kind of confuse the devil if you make beautiful lines and colors, and that the bad spirits either can either be scared off with her, shocking imagery, or that beautiful imagery somehow contains a space in a certain way and keeps it safe. So I think that there's a quite an esoteric layer of thinking about things, but it's kind of fascinating to me. But I do it sort of automatically. I notice that my work has this kind of sense of containment, and I need it to be beautiful. So I hope that sort of answers in a vague way.
We have next, I'm going to just say that I know we have questions coming from Elizabeth, Pippa, Lori, and Faye. So know that I have you written down. I'm going to next unmute Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. This is so wonderful to be here. Two things just occurred to me. One was when you showed the amulet for protection against lightning storms in the brain, that just felt like there were so many deep layers of magic and meaning, with the metal being so conductive to electricity, and just the whole, you know what I mean? It almost felt like, yeah, it felt like alchemy. It was like an alchemical process. And it's also kind of interesting that a person who's explored the edges, like yourself, it feels like epilepsy is one of those kinds of conditions very related to the magic of the unknown and being in a special liminal space that's not accessible to all. So, it's kind of a curse, but also like a gift in a weird way, isn't it? To have such a thing that goes with your exploration. I'm sure I can't talk of it because I don't have it, but and the other thing I wanted to say was I was very interested that the way you describe your reaction to the music you love, the Eastern music, the words you use were almost identical words that you used for the people trying to explain the effect your art has on them. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Yes, definitely. And in fact, that very point would have been the next thing that I went on to talk about if I'd had all evening. That it's fascinating to me, and it's definitely, that's my sort of the next chapter of my journey, and one that I've begun to delve into a lot, in terms of understanding what epilepsy is from so many different angles. So not only from a scientific perspective, but from cultural perspectives and from different times and different parts of the world. Epilepsy in many places and is viewed as a sort of curse, which it really is, but it can it can confer a certain privilege in certain cultures, that you can only be the village magician if you have epilepsy. You can't do it otherwise. And in fact, in some places it's considered the reason that you have seizures is because your spirit animal is being attacked in the other world. So I've explored this a lot, and there's plenty more exploring to do. And yes, indeed, it's exactly this question of the edge place and of the going into the other world, and the experience of having a seizure as well. Is so many people who have temporal lobe epilepsy, which is what I have really quite visionary experiences. So and many famous figures from the past have had epilepsy. Well, we don't really realize that they have had epilepsy, but their visionary experiences been put down to seizures. Even St. Paul on the road to Damascus, Dostoevsky, Van Gogh, perhaps. All sorts of well-known figures who some people do have visions and hear voices of beings and deities, and definitely it's a very uncanny otherworldly experience, but for me extremely frightening, and so there's plenty more exploration to do there, but it definitely feels key, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. and also what you say about the metal there as well. It's kind of fascinating that remaining open to what comes through, because I can be surprised by it again and again.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I will read Pippa's unless you want to add to it. Just let me know. But Pippa wanted to know if there was if a particular color was relevant and how it's used in your art.
Good question. Thank you, Pippa. Yes, I seem to have a really constant thread of red in my work, but it's not a pillar box red. It's perhaps a kind of rusty burgundy, somewhere between those two colors. I guess it's blood, but maybe a little bit more. Feels a little bit more older and more rustic than a bright. It's not bright, but that's definitely what, if I'm looking around my living room here, it's definitely the predominant color, and it feels important. I notice when it's not there, I feel kind of thirsty, if that makes sense.
And then the next question is from Lori. They ask, are you able to enter the liminal space to work in the middle of the day? Because as a lifetime artist, they always were able to work at night and carry on with practical obligations without much sleep, but not so much now because they're barreling towards 70. So there's a constant conflict. So wondering if you can work magic in the middle of the day, what are some techniques for that?
Interesting question. Yes, that's changed a bit for me over my life. I used to find it I used to find the evening times more potent. Then I had children, and then by the evening I'm finished, really. So, I do work in the day. I have to, because that's when my children are at school. So I have to figure out a way of sort of pulling the magic out of the bag in sort of between school hours, which is, sounds very unromantic, but that's the sort of necessity of it. In terms of tricks, that's really important. Finding ways to make an environment in which you feel inspired and you feel safe and able to open the doors to these other realms, because it's not something that I can't do it, for example, in company. So I need to be alone. And I need the environment I'm in needs to be aesthetically pleasing to my eye. So I couldn't be, for example, in a service station or I have jarring colors around me in my environment that affects me. Particularly, music is the big one, as I mentioned already. The music makes a big difference. Also, lighting a candle or using burning herbs or incense or something like that can help too. So using your different senses. Music is probably the number one for me, and finding music that makes you feel that feeling like you're listening, like you feel when you're listening to a story. So if you imagine listening to a folk tale being told and you're drifting into that world of going down the path in the woods, what makes you feel like that? And everyone's different, so we all have our own the things that work that help you to get into that space. And it's a sort of trial and error thing, but it's totally doable in the day. Play around with lighting maybe as well.
And then our last question comes from Faye, who I'm going to unmute. And we have a few minutes for that, and then we'll need to pass on to Rachel.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Rima. Thank you so much. I can feel my heart's sort of bubbling and fizzing with inspiration. So thank you. I'm really curious. I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I would love to know a bit more about how they stay alive, how the amulets stay alive, and like maybe in particular with the ones around the pain and the epilepsy, like what's the after story after creating them? What if you want to share, because I can imagine it might be quite vulnerable.
I don't know, actually. Thank you for your excitement and fizzing. I don't know. I'm waiting to see, actually, because I feel like their work isn't finished, the ones that I've made, and they're in my life and are with me. I definitely can't sell them. So I had them in a recent exhibition, and it's like really I'm not going about it the right way to be a kind of successful commercial artist. I keep making things like this that I absolutely cannot sell, because they're really personal, potent pieces of work. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen yet with them, and what will happen when, if those things become transmuted, then it may be that they need burying or changing or repainting or burning, or I don't know, or throwing in the sea. I mean, I have no idea, but I'm sort of open to what happens next with them. And I suspect they might have different lifespans, all of them, because some are for more specific things and some are slightly wider in their aims. And more amulets are coming. There are sort of the next one is dancing around the edges. So I really don't know the answer to that.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rima. Thank you, Abby, for taking care of everyone. Those of you just here for this evening, I hope you've received all that you wished. And if you are now really thirsty, you can please send me a message, and we'll be happy to let you over the threshold again. Next week, we are going to dive into the ancient world, and as you see, our circle is filled with people, Jewish or not, and that's a lot of us are in Western world places influenced by particular understandings of biblical culture, many of which are not necessarily correct. Understanding, that the Bible has been translated, retranslated through particularly dogmatic versions of Christianity in a lot of the countries where we live. So next week, when we go into understanding Jewish perspectives, our vision is that whatever culture you are from, it is a useful way of re-understanding, firstly, the Christian-based cultures that a lot of us live in, and questioning the assumptions made about the source text out of which so much of that was born. And also sometimes by, as was happening with Rima sharing about her artwork, then people in the chat were sharing about what their own family members do or what they do personally or what they've seen on the doorway of their house. And a kind of coven style learning happens in which even if we're speaking from our particular ancestral or personal perspectives, you may find new light shed on wherever you are walking from and whatever peoples are walking inside you. So please know that you are most welcome to join us as we go deep into the ancestry that I work with next week. And there's so many amazing connections that we find. We start to stitch together between the work we've heard Rima speak about, the works and understandings of what an amulet is in some parts of the ancient world that I am familiar with. And then in the weeks after that, understanding what we might do with that in our own craft. We'll be making some things together, very manageable things, to see if we can bring a little of that into our lives in the way that we wish. If you want to chat about this, then there's a couple of spaces. We did have a Discord, but I don't have anyone tending it right now. So those of you who use Ye Olde Ancient Facebook, there is a Yelala conversation group. You're welcome to join us and chat there. If you have direct questions for Rima, you can message and email us. We'll do our best. Please understand that there are many other things filling our time. A recording will be sent out by Wednesday. And also, if you are the kind of person who uses Instagram and something interesting has come up, please just tag us if like something fascinating came up or an image came to mind you want to share, something that stands at your threshold. I'm just going to put our little Instagram tabs there. And the way that we invite you to leave this space, you can do it how you like, but we have found it to be quite gentle and tender rather than everyone or me just kicking everyone else by clicking the end button. It always feels a bit awkward to us, the whole suddenly leaving and there's just everything else on my desktop computer. So if you wish to, as I sing, we invite you to tiptoe over the threshold and out again by turning your camera off first until we have a little constellation of black and white names. And when you feel ready, click the leave button yourself. So you should never feel chucked out from our door. And I know that you are always welcome back again. Thank you, Rima. Thank you, Abby. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you all. I've loved being with you this evening. Thank you, Rachel.
See you next week. She creates her world as she speaks. She creates her world as she speaks. Her world she creates as she speaks. They create their world as they craft. They create their world as they craft. Their world they create as they craft. They create their life as they paint. They create their life as they paint. Their world they create as they paint. And we create our world as we weave. We create our world as we weave. Our world we create as we weave.